Firstly, I would like to thank the organizer for the invite, and also all the speakers and the participants so far for what has proven to be a very vibrant conversation up to this point. So yesterday, in the introductory addresses to this conference, there has been mention to a number of issues that I will not necessarily directly tackle today, and that is the reference to the European Union being born out of a fractured past and an idea of unity from multiplicity, the reference to common good, freedom, and equality that are a concern for all of us when we talk about dignity, but not only. When we move back in time, about 500 years, at the end of the 15th century, and talk about Pico della Mirandola, we talk about a theologian and philosopher and a humanist who was very much concerned with these same ideas. Giovanni Pico della Mirandola was lived between 1463 and 1494. Sorry, that's a typo. 1494 in northern and central Italy, between Mirandola, which is near Modena and Bologna, Florence and Rome, in the backdrop of a very fractured Italian peninsula. So his idea and his concern was how to overcome these fractures from a religious point of view and also from a political point of view on a theoretical level. So in talking about Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, usually scholars, and everyone else refers to begin with the oration on the dignity of man, which was composed in 1486 as an introductory speech to his 900 theses. The idea, the plan that Giovanni Pico della Mirandola had was to present in a council, what he called a council, is 900 theses to be discussed with scholars from all over Europe to basically propose a concord among philosophies and religion in an attempt to seek peace, pax philosophica, philosophical peace concept. So there is a lot of emphasis on the oration on the dignity of man, but the two things that we should remember when we read the oration on the dignity of man is that it was meant as a speech that was never pronounced because his plan didn't go ahead, and so it's not a philosophical treatise per se. It was meant to introduce a philosophical treatise, and secondly, that Pico never titled it Oration on the Dignity of Man. In the first occurrences, in manuscripts and in printed editions, it's just called Oratio, oration. So what is interesting to reflect upon perhaps is that on the dignity of man was added in later edition of his work, around the 1570s, so almost 80 years after the disappearance of Pico, and is part of the history of the tradition of Pico's oration rather than what he intended himself. And I'll get back to that. It's important because sometimes there is this notion, especially among non-specialists, that the oration on the dignity of man is one of the key texts, or perhaps one of the original texts on the conversation about human rights. And then when those who deal with human rights, especially political theorists and so on, read the oration, realize that it's actually a theological discourse. So there are some difficulties when we do that. In any case, that does not mean that Pico doesn't deal with the idea of human dignity, although I should also add that in recent scholarship this has been disputed, so I'm sort of representing a certain interpretation of Pico, but there are others. If you look at this page that you have in front of you, this is the first page of the oration that was published in 1496, 2 years after Pico's death. And if you look at not so much at the text, but at the notes on the side, you will see that they refer to a number of authorities that Pico is like looking at chapter titles, and you will see that it starts with an Abdallah Saracenus, Abdallah the Arab, whom we don't know who this person is. He's never been identified, and then goes on with Mercurius, Asclepius, the Persians, Perse, David, Moses, the Timaeus, and so on. So in this part, Pico basically refers to his main authorities, and it's important to note that a number of the authorities he referred to are known, not necessarily Christian authorities, but are Hebrew authorities, Arabic authorities, possibly Islamic, and Hermetic authorities. That's the background. So that's the philosophical and theological background of Pico. So after this introduction, I'll perhaps show another version of the same text, which is the only extant manuscript that we have, which is in Florence at the National Library, which contains an earlier version of what we see printed. But the beginning, the incipit is the same. So back to dignity. For Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, human dignity consists in the mystical vocation of the human creature as a creature of indeterminate image, to transcend any image, becoming one with the divinity that is beyond representation. And human vocation is a mystical vocation that has to be realized following a three-stage way, which comprehends necessarily moral transformation, intellectual research, and final perfection in the identity with the absolute reality. This paradigm is universal because it can be retraced in every theological and religious tradition. So, this is sort of a strong statement, and I will spend the rest of the paper trying to justify it. So, Pico's thought constitutes a new synthesis pervaded by a pluralistic perspective, according to which many are the ways that lead to the same goal, although Pico professes one of these, the Christian way. Pico, as it were, considered many roads to lead to the truth, parallel paths, which all lead to the same end, but which may reach it in different ways. Pico held that every major theological tradition contained elements of truth, and that these elements could be combined into a grand synthesis that was at the same time compatible with Orthodox Christianity. He believed that the understanding previous theologians had of the sources of their own theological traditions was not necessarily correct. In fact, Pico's aim was to construct a new theology using material from existing historical theologies as building blocks. His so-called new theology would be superior to those already existent because it would provide a richer understanding of Christian truth. Pico was not interested in directly challenging Christian dogmas, but he did wish, like many other Renaissance humanists, to move Christian theological speculation beyond the circle of traditional authorities. Seen in this light, Pico can be placed at the end of a period full of ecumenical hopes, in which the work of a very important, very influential earlier thinker, Nicholas of Cusa, had made an important impact. About 35 years before Pico composed the oration, in his On the Peace of Faith, Nicholas of Cusa attempted to illuminate the vital process and dialectic of a spiritual unity that could be realized in the plural. For every different time, place, and culture, the common wisdom had to assume different ways and forms that would reveal its profound truth precisely through the supreme Christian wisdom. Achieving a sense of community among all faiths and human traditions and recognizing some of the infinite faces of God within them becomes the most urgent task for those who want not only to affirm the supreme good of peace, but also to recognize the absolute harmony and unity that exists thanks to the divine being. The philosophical and theological speculation of the two thinkers, Nicholas of Cusa and Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, joined in the common conviction that only a spiritual understanding of the evangelical message could provide all faiths with their real significance, which coincides with a truth transcending all context and human definitions. For Nicholas of Cusa, this truth undoubtedly coincided with Christian revelation intended in its most universal values. These ideas would also inform the thought of Pico a few decades later, who joined them with his keen interest in Islamic and Jewish theology and sources. In particular, Pico turned to the scriptural literature of the Kabbalah, which led him to believe that he had discovered the keys to unlock the mystery of the sacred text, and that he had cleared the path to a search for common truth. But he also refers, as I mentioned at the outset, to a yet unidentified Arabic authority in his opening of the oration. Pico thus came to be convinced that the very same wisdom was reflected in each and everything. In this sense, he became the propagator of an ethical, religious, and political program that sought to affirm man's freedom and his dignity as the only creature able to choose his destiny. It is with this specific frame of reference that one must approach Pico's project to overcome human division and conflict with a shared concord of all beliefs and expression of a common wisdom. Interested in achieving a concord among religions on a practical level, Pico tried to hasten this difficult process, announcing, as I said at the beginning, a council to be held in Rome during the Epiphany of 1486, at which scholars from all over Europe would be confronted with these 900 theses, and through them try to come to consensus and find the truth of a common logos, a common discourse. I'm not going to get into details of this, but this council never happened. And of course, we should also note that in a few decades after, the panorama of Europe changed completely with the Reformation. So sort of it looks like European history takes a completely different path only years after. From a theoretical point of view, where is this framework coming from? In Pico, it is derived from an idea of man seen as a chameleon. Who will not wonder at this chameleon of ours? Asks Pico, referring to man. Echoing the words of Plutarch, who used the figure of the chameleon to describe the fascinating and contradictory personality of Alcibiades. What Plutarch uses as a metaphor becomes, in Pico, the symbol positively representing man's nature, seen as a constellation of ideas in perennial movement, the only creature that contains every sort of seed and sprouts of every kind of life. The chameleon is just one of several definitions Pico uses. Man is declared to be a great wonder, a messenger between creatures, the interpreter of nature, what is in between eternity's steadfastness and the flux of time, the bond, as the Persians say, that knots the world together, indeed the nuptial bond. And finally, the animal that is most happy. Because our nature changes and transforms itself in a hermetic fashion, man is a godlike son of the Most High, according to Asaph, the prophet in Psalm 81. Pico, in a statement that has embodied the idea itself of modernity, writes, "O great and wonderful happiness of man, to whom it is given to have that which he chooses and to be that which he wills." It would seem indeed to be a high point for the voluntarist's emphasis on the preeminence of the faculty of the will, for it is the will which governs our choice of what to be, what sphere to take as our own, what color to become in our chameleonic lives. The chameleonic man is established as the midpoint between the four determinate worlds of the organic or vegetative, the animal, the celestial, and the intellectual or angelic world. But man himself is a work of, as Pico says, of indeterminate form, with no fixed seat, no distinguishable semblance, no gift, as he says, peculiarly his. Accordingly, whereas the natures of other created things, plants, animals, celestial souls, and angelic intellects, are confined within the limits God has composed for them, Adamic man is not similarly confined. He can choose his own bounds. From his central position, he can gaze upon the world and then set about sculpting himself into whatever shape or determination he elects, whether brutish or divine life. As the undetermined one, he will determine his own limit. From being of indeterminate form, he will adopt a form, the molder and maker of himself. This whole argumentation occurs in the context of an exhortation by God, which is the master builder, to Adam. And one of its sources, as Pico himself indicates, was the apostrophe in the Hermetic Asclepius. The interpretation of Genesis 1:26-28 played a significant role in the formulation of Pico's idea of man. Here is the biblical passage that he is referring to. And I'll just read the part that are interesting for us. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and so on, etc. And number 27, so God created man is in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. According to Pico, in his oration, God, after having created mankind, without having been able to provide models or archetypes for him, decreed that this creature, to whom he could give nothing wholly his own, should have a share in the particular endowment of every other creature. So, taking man, this creature of indeterminate image, he set him in the middle of the world and thus spoke to him. And that's what you see behind me. We have given you, Adam, no fixed seat nor feature proper to yourself, in order that whatever seat, whatever feature you may responsibly desire, the same you may have and possess according to your own desire and judgment. And I'll skip to the bottom. It will be in your power to degenerate to the lower forms of life, which are brutish, you shall have the power to be reborn in the higher orders which are divine. That man is the work of an undefined image of a God who dwells in obscurity. And this means for Pico not simply a rhetorical and narrative invention, but a deep philosophical and religious insight. This could be the quotes that are that I just showed you could also be connected to another quote in another work, a later work by Giovanni Pico della Mirandola called The Heptaplus, which is specifically on that creation in which the same notions are repeated. As you see there on the screen, let us make man in our image, and having created the entire mechanism of the world in the midst, the last of all the creatures, he placed man, formed in his image and likeness. Pico sets aside the analogy between the human mind and the Trinity and instead identifies it with the fact that man, like God, contains all things, not as a cause, but as someone in the midst. That is also referred to again in the oration, in which is sort of repeating the same notion. Hence, in Pico's interpretation of In the Heptaplus, the story of creation, the terms characterizing this new image of man are centrality, dominion, and the service of every creature. Man thus becomes the representative of God in the creation of this hierarchical positioning of mankind in a stance which every discussion on dignity in European history should confront itself with. Skipping to the conclusion, I'm sorry if I'm going a little bit over. The complete formulation in the modern sense of dignity and rights as a combination of liberty and equality, that is, between men and women in the first place, has managed to emerge through the meeting of a religious and philosophical perspective in which Adam's primordial condition is thought of as a condition of nature, a surviving of the fall, with a biblical theological perspective. The result is the powerful emergence of the interpretation of man image of God as the human representative of divine power over the earth and nature. In this sense, and following a typology of political theology proposed by Jakob Taubes and Jan Assmann, monotheism is to be placed in the context of a theocratic model. God governs the world directly through his prophets. My time is over, but I just wanted to mention some problems in terms of how this discourse has been received. If we talk about if we think about the heritage of this discourse, we should, and we jump from the 15th century onto the 20th century, we should, of course, mention the work and the engagement of Jacques Dupuy, since we are in Belgium, in terms of religious pluralism and the condemnation of the church that he received when he wrote Towards a Christian Theology of Religious Pluralism. But also a more recent acquisition of political philosophy and political theory. That is, in the work of a number of philosophers, especially of late Diego Rossello and Will Kimlicka, the idea of treating dignity and human rights without necessarily referring to human supremacy. That is the idea that men have sort of a hierarchical higher position over the rest of the creation. So Rossello talks about aristocratic dignitas and species aristocracism, and Kimlicka, in a very recent article, talks about a return of the dignitarians who argue that human rights are grounded in dignity and that human dignity requires according humans are higher status than animals. According to Kimlicka, this is a tragic choice in the sense that the discourse on human rights should be upheld without referring to human supremacy. So I can, and this is obviously a very complicated issue, but I just wanted to point out that this is perhaps the next step to take when we talk about dignity. Thank you.